Hello, welcome to another TeamSense Tuesday webinar. My name is Caroline Rizzo, and I'm so pleased to be joined today by Abika and Alison from our TeamSense team. Today, we'll be talking about how HR managers can really support diversity in their organization and how they can actually utilize AI to do this. Before we jump into it, though, let's cover a few housekeeping items. So as always, questions are encouraged throughout the webinar. There's a little Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. You can place them there really throughout the webinar, but we'll plan to get to them towards the end. Don't be shy with your questions. We love answering questions, so feel free to shoot them in there if anything pops up in your mind. And also, as you probably realized, we are recording this webinar. So if you have to hop early or want to come visit the content at a later time, we will be emailing out the recording via a YouTube link, usually by end of today, as when we'll typically get it out. Maybe tomorrow morning, we'll see. But you can always go to teamsense.com/webinars and visit any of our previous content there or register for future webinars as well. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Alison and Abika to introduce themselves. Welcome, ladies. So great to see you both.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks for kicking it off, Caroline. Yeah, maybe we start just really quickly with introductions. Abika, if you want to introduce yourself and your role.
Sure. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope everyone had a great eclipse watching yesterday. I'm Abika, VP of Engineering at TeamSense, Seattle native, UW alum, University of Washington alumni. Worked at bunch of enterprises before coming into TeamSense. TeamSense is a women-founded software SaaS organization. So, it doesn't get any more diverse than that. So here I am trying to do my part with engineering.
Awesome. Thanks, Abika. And I'm Alison Teegarden. I am the COO and one of the co-founders of TeamSense, and have been very involved in the development of the product from the get-go, including sort of stewarding the journey of supporting linguistic diversity on the TeamSense product. So I'm really excited about this topic today. And I'm actually going to start by kind of stepping back and talking about linguistic diversity in the United States a little bit. When we say language diversity and what's needed to support language diversity in the United States, what do we mean by that? So this is some data from the U.S. Census Bureau, who looks at those households in the United States that primarily speak English versus not. And what we see is over time, the percentage of the population that is not speaking English at home is growing. And as you might expect, this is very concentrated in Spanish or languages that are closely related to Spanish, but there's actually a significant diversity beyond that. Here I'm showing the top 5 languages, but there's a long tail of a lot of different languages. And one of the really fun privileges of the work that TeamSense does working with hourly employees is that we often get to interact with that long tail of languages more than a lot of other software companies may. And so getting to work with a very diverse population is one of the privileges of what we do at TeamSense. And supporting you all in doing that is one of the most fun things that we get to do. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about how TeamSense enables that, some of the strategies that we've observed are successful in supporting really linguistically diverse employee populations, and then also how TeamSense leverages AI to be able to support that and some of the ways that that could apply as well. So just to jump in to communicating with a multilingual workforce, some of the strategies that we observe are really successful here. So the most important one, the first one, it seems really basic, but many companies actually don't know this. The first is just to know what languages you need to support. So a lot of companies may assume that, if they have Spanish and English, they have it covered. But from our own experience, both Abika and I can tell you that there is a lot more diversity that is out there than just Spanish and English, and so understanding what employees need on the floor is really step number one.
I think one thing I would add is even from there is the consumer or customer aspect of language support. In software, though, typically the bias tends to be towards EFIGs, English, French, Italian, German, and Spanish, right? But if we look at our TeamSense's customers associate base, they're predominantly coming from various parts of the world where EFIX doesn't even come to scratch the surface. So it's really interesting what we do and how we bring language translation to support the workforce, as Alison was saying.
You're totally right. There tends to be like this heavy emphasis on languages rooted in European, sort of European descent, and we see far more diversity in the TeamSense workforce. And one thing I'll also add on here is if you're struggling with how exactly am I supposed to find out what languages are needed on the floor, that's actually a perfect use case for a TeamSense custom form. So our team, if you're an existing customer, our team can go ahead and help you set that up to assess what languages are needed. So please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. The second thing is, once you know what languages need to be supported, taking the time to translate announcements and policies is really crucial. I mean, for those of you who speak English as your first language, you can imagine if you were operating in an environment where all of the announcements or policies were handed out to you in Mandarin, there's absolutely no way that you would be able to navigate, what is expected of me? What do I need to do in response to this? And so that's the experience that a lot of employees have. And what we've seen is that a lot of customers choose to use the TeamSense Communicate feature to be able to send out messages in multiple languages. They'll send out the message in English, and then they'll send out the message in Bengali, then they'll send out the message in Creole, etc. And the response they get from employees is really cool. What they see is that employees will come to them and say, I've worked in multiple different companies and I've never had a company care enough before to take the time to make sure that important announcements are made to me in my own language. So I would say, encourage you to take the time for any important announcements and policies to go ahead and do that. It's a huge driver of employee engagement and recognizing that we see the diversity in the workforce and we're here to support it. The third thing that I would encourage you to consider is around two-way survey translation. So one of the challenges, we talked about announcement, that's actually sharing information to employees, pushing information, from corporate or whatnot to employees, but gathering input from employees is also really crucial and is really challenging when it comes to a really linguistically diverse workforce. So one of the examples that where we see this at TeamSense is TeamSense primarily starts working with different companies in the context of call-offs. We help companies automate call-offs and do so in a way with transparency that drives accountability and ultimately reduces absenteeism. And one of the challenges that we see when companies come to us that they're struggling with is they have a very linguistically diverse workforce, but a lot of times the employee and their supervisor don't necessarily speak the same first language. And the challenge with call-offs is a lot of times, prior to using TeamSense, we see employees leaving voicemails, struggling to communicate either in their second language, English, or in their first, but a language that isn't understood by their supervisor, when they're going to be off, why they're going to be off, and then the HR team really wrestling with this information, trying to figure out how to code it in a language that is not their first language. And so the reality is that the translation really needs to go both ways. So not only do you need to translate what questions are asked to the employees, but also how those questions and responses are then interpreted on the back end. And so with TeamSense, we manage this by, when we translate a survey, all of those inputs into the survey, multiple choice questions or whatnot, are translated two ways. And so we can provide, let's say a supervisor who primarily speaks Spanish has an employee who primarily speaks Vietnamese. The Vietnamese employee can fill out their survey in Vietnamese, and the Spanish speaking supervisor would be able to see there's multiple choice responses and whatnot in their language of choice. And so making sure that you understand kind of both sides of the coin, I think, is really crucial to success here. Abika, anything else that you'd add on top of that?
No.
Awesome. So I'm going to share a little bit about how TeamSense has sort of made this journey on our own. Very early in the TeamSense journey, we began adding additional languages to our supported list, and over the years we have grown this list. Every year new languages are added, and it's really fun, to be honest, to get to work with organizations who come to us and say, oh, I've got a new one for you, and for us to work with them in terms of translating both the product and the surveys to support those languages. And so this is the list of languages that we support today, but as I said, it grows every year. And so if there is a language that is not represented on this list, we would love to hear from you and look at adding that to our list of supported languages as well. But to Bika, to your point, what's missing here is an emphasis on languages of European descent. This is a very diverse list of languages.
Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about AI soon. From machine translation perspective, if you look at the list, what interests me from technology aspect, the high resource language versus low resource language, right? When in current day, anyone that is using machine translation, they do understand that certain languages that are spoken in global north are referred as high resource languages because the models are trained, organically to support those far more heavily compared to low resource languages like Kinyarwanda, Urdu, Hindi. Even though the population may be heavily speaking, it's not necessarily amicable for translation. There tends to be human context missing and whatnot. So anytime one of our customer comes to us and says, hey guys, we need you to support Ukrainian and Kinyarwanda, which just happened to us in Q1, we get excited because that's another, low resource language that we're trying to onboard and trying to support our associates who come from a different part of the world. So it's really exciting, especially from engineering perspective at TeamSense.
Totally. And some of the languages on this list, Haitian Creole, Marshallese are actually spoken by a fairly small population globally. So it's just, again, really cool to see the level of diversity at all of our customers and the needs and different languages represented there. So you teased AI, Abika, and that's where we're going. Maybe we'll start a little bit by talking about how we leverage AI to assess sort of intent in a survey. So we're talking about multilingual diversity, but the easiest way to understand this is first to just start by looking at English. And so thinking through, when an employee calls off in TeamSense, they text into TeamSense typically, and they might say something like, sorry, my kid is sick, can't come in today. And we on the TeamSense side of things have to figure out what to do with that text. Maybe you could walk us through how we are handling that kind of an input.
Yeah. So TeamSense customers know this notion of surveys. That is part of our product, something that our customers leverage heavily. And the survey actually gives us a library of keywords that can process call-offs or day off specific parameters that our logic recognizes. So this is where we leverage LLM or large language model based AI to when someone calls off and they either speak, so natural language processing, or they text, there is a recognition of keywords that we recognize based on the surveys that we build for our customers. So consider that as our own lexicon or library, right? From an AI perspective, just the magnitude of AI perspective, what we do is fairly simple. It falls into this classification question algorithm. And given that we already know surveys and keywords, it's fairly simplified process at that point. Now, there may be chances where someone says something that is not recognizable. Even then, that's where the intelligence part comes into picture, where the AI can actually grok through, parse it, and compare it with the other remaining words that we have in survey, and actually process by asking few more follow-on questions and so on. So in language translation perspective and how machines translate languages, what we do is fairly simplified, but we make it so because we are also giving it a library to use as opposed to just using inbuilt intelligence. So it makes it a little bit more predictable, and makes the process really dependable. End of the day, when someone calls off and says something, like we have actually, by leveraging the surveys and keywords, we are improving the outcome there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the really cool thing about these large language models is one of their, the ability for them to navigate through multiple languages. So as we look at like comparing the input into our survey library and doing so with an LLM, you can see here's some examples. Sorry, my kid is sick, can't come in today, and we're assessing the intent, but we can do that in multiple languages. So obviously English, and then here we're seeing Haitian Creole, we're seeing Vietnamese. And this is a fun fact for those of you who are TeamSense customers and want to try it out. If you even send in the sick emoji into this AI engine, we will interpret what you intend to say, which is that you're sick and you can't come in today, and we will deliver your absence form. So in terms of kind of the application of AI to sort of the acknowledging diversity and supporting diversity in general, Abika, can you just talk a little bit about, obviously this is a linguistic application of that, but there are broader applications of AI. Could you talk a little bit about, what are some of the opportunities that have been observed in this very early days of AI that could be leveraged by HR as a function?
Yeah. So from TeamSense perspective, we rely machine translation for languages, obviously. But if we take a step back from human resource discipline within the industry, regardless which industry you're participating, the key or predominant adoption has been administrative functions, right? So talent acquisition, say resource sourcing, review of resumes, reaching out like very broad pool of candidates, those kind of activities from talent acquisition perspective have been predominantly shown to be successful with AI. And when we talk about AI, we should also talk about challenges and implications. So let's get to that like in a little bit, because it's not all, awesomeness, right? There is also employee engagement has seen really good results with using AI, right? I personally have not seen, at least looking at the industry level graphs and whatnot, performance management and monitoring is not something that's leveraged by AI, even though there are products there. And I have my own personal like opinions about it, like how do you measure performance using AI model? But talent acquisition, I think reaching to a really broad, diverse candidate pool. And I'll give an example. In software technology, we see a very inane pattern where women tend to not apply to a position if they think they don't match 100% of the expectations that are
Right.
specified in the resume, I mean JD. Whereas men, even if it meets 60%, they're more willing to apply to a position. Some of it is social construct. It has nothing to do with competence, right? So there are AI models that can actually scrub the job description to make it sound less masculine. You know, not necessarily fix the words, but make it a little bit more open and welcoming to folks from minority, folks from, various genders and whatnot. So there is really some cool applications that you can see from HR functions perspective in that way.
Love it. Love it. Absolutely. And you teased a little bit on some of the challenges. Maybe just mention, let's talk a little bit about those so we can get kind of a comprehensive picture, and then we can head towards Q&A.
Yeah. Um, so we have a predominant use case of where we leverage AI for language translation, right? Using LLM. Machine translations is actually impacted by human bias, and it gears towards, as I mentioned previously, languages spoken in global north. So if you think about like idioms in Urdu or certain colloquial phrases in Tagalog, they don't necessarily read like how a human would read when applied to a machine translation, right? And sometimes you see errors where same word is repeated in the results multiple times. That's because the way we speak language it's almost very human, right? Like we have cultural things added in there. We have our own nurture, nature aspects come into picture, how we speak, where we come from, and all that. Whereas you are essentially feeding certain parameters to say how you translate, and you're giving it a lexicon, so it doesn't necessarily come out the way it should, right? So this is where, like, I think when we are using machine translations, again, depending on the use case, for us, it's a simplified use case. Depending on the use case, you want to be careful about the inherent bias that could be towards high resource versus low resource languages. Now, we are here speaking about diversity, right? One part of our presentation is actually supporting diversity. So in AI, there is this notion of emergence. Essentially, if you're a student of life sciences, you would have seen this in experiments. The self-organizing collective behaviors that appear when a large collection of things start acting like one. So one example would be like a cell and your body, right? So in AI, emergence leads to unpredictability, especially when things get scale up really highly. And when you throw in unpredictability, this is where the model could result in a biased or skewing the diversity fashion that doesn't make AI racist or unethical. It's just the way it functions. As you scale up and throw more results at it, um, it's difficult even for the researchers to anticipate how it's going to react in a certain conditions, because not everybody can predict every single permutation of the use case. So this is where, from HR discipline perspective, if you're leveraging AI products for certain questions, ask, what does this product do? What does it used for? Is it meant to, or will it disempower or certain, impact negatively in certain parts of my question? And how often the, model is being retrained? That's a really important question. Are there auditors on the algorithm? We have such fascination with AI, and since, this is probably the most coolest thing that has happened since internet, so we should be excited about it. But at the same time, we should ask questions, right? How often the algorithm is being audited, especially if you're using it for DEI, ask those questions. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely, Abika. I mean, I think overall it sounds like your message, I think, is be thoughtful, right? This is not a case of blindly applying this tool because it's the coolest thing out there right now, even though it is, like you said, it is really exciting. But being thoughtful about how you use it and using it surgically, so that we can make sure that we're reflecting some of those challenges and limitations around the use of these models when we use them. Awesome. Thank you, Vika. Well, with that, I think I will turn it over to Caroline for facilitating a little bit of Q&A.
Yes, hello, good to be back. So we did have a couple questions come in. Before we get to the Q&A section, let's talk a little bit about our topic for next week. So as I mentioned, I said welcome to another TeamSense Tuesday webinar. So we do have webinars every Tuesday. Again, you can take a look at our website to see what's upcoming or webinars that have happened in the past. So next week, I will actually be joined by Sarah Irvin, who is our Senior Customer Success Manager. We're going to talk about a really hot topic around how to talk to your employees about excessive absenteeism. So we've had a lot of questions from customers about this. We have a really great blog out there that we've written, but we really want to speak to the topic, and Sarah has some really great advice on this. So I think it's a really great opportunity for HR managers to get a little refresher on, hey, what have we seen with our customers? What are some ways that maybe I can think about this topic and apply it really to my own organization? So looking forward to that. Feel free to join us next week. You'll get an email to register as well. Okay, let's go ahead and hop into the Q&A section. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see ways to also get in touch with us. I think a really great way to see TeamSense in action is with a demo. So it's super easy to sign up for one. You can get it easily accessed via calendar link where you can schedule one so you can meet with one of our experts to really get a sense for how TeamSense works behind the scenes. But let's get to the questions. So I know AI is a really hot topic in today's times. Clearly, it's why we decided to talk a little bit more about it. I think we talked a little bit about this in general, but I think this would be a great question for both of y'all. Someone's asking, how really accurate is AI, and maybe how accurate is it in the TeamSense product?
Yeah, I can take that. Again, we don't blindly use AI. We are selective in use cases, and we are selective in which models we use. We also study what the accuracy has been for that model over last two releases or whatnot. So there is a process in which we actually test, evaluate before choosing, instead of just jumping onto a bandwagon. And that is the risk, right? Like how fast it's being adopted. People do tend to forget, similar to any other product, you need to vet it. So we are, like Alison mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, right now we use mostly for translation, and that process is very reliable from TeamSense use case perspective because there is another guardrail of our own survey keywords that we use. So the execution is actually geared towards doing what it is meant to do, right? We don't allow unpredictability in the way we adopted LLM. That said, how accurate it depends on the use case. And it depends on how many arguments or parameters that were thrown at. Some of the models are like 450 billion. Some of the models are more than that, less than that. So it depends on the use case. I would say from technology perspective, it's the degree of unpredictability that skews the results. So expecting something to be 100% accurate is somewhat like naive, I would say. So I would question, especially from diversity inclusivity perspective, do anticipate that results could skew because if there is a new use case that's being thrown at the trained model, it could generate a little bit of different results or unexpected results. The good thing is you can always instruct it. End of the day, these are our trained models, right? You can pass an instruction saying, ignore these biases or ignore these stereotypical characteristics, then model will adjust and result in a different way. So I would say accuracy is not something people do throw. OpenAI produces numbers all the time from performance perspective, but I would encourage people to think about unpredictability before they worry about accuracy.
That's a really good point. I think another interesting thing that you had touched on too is really how HR managers are using AI, and what they can really get out of it. There's a really great article out there from Shrim that really touches on some of the trends with artificial intelligence too. We will gladly share that article out with the recording of the webinar too, because I think it would be such an interesting topic for any HR managers that are attending to really look through. It really surveyed people to get an understanding of how they're using it. And so we will share that as well. We do have a final question that came in. I think this is always a burning topic on everybody's mind if you're a human being, but future of AI, what does it look like? I was like, that's great.
Just the future of AI.
What is the future? If you had to use your crystal ball, what would it look like?
Um, it helps a lot as an automated decision-making system. And us as human species, we love automated decision-making systems because it takes a little bit of burden away of risk off of our hands. So in my view, I think administrative functions where automation could help heavily from operational efficiency perspective, those are going to be handled. But um, the interesting things to observe in future is actually how rapidly it's being adopted. But the results and correction of any results, unwarranted results, is where I think the friction is going to be. So from a future of AI perspective, how quickly we can fix, especially societal impacting things, those things would be something, interesting to watch. And a lot of universities are investing a ton of time in building labs to properly train these models as opposed to, catch it afterwards. So there is that balance that we see in the industry today with AI research to slowing it down from and adding it like a lot more emphasis on diversity, reducing bias error, all of that. So it's going to be interesting. Alison, your thoughts? I know you have opinions on future of AI.
The future of AI. Yeah, I mean, so I think one thing, Abika, you and I were talking about this in preparation for this discussion, is nobody expected the speed at which AI would become so mature. It really was like a light bulb flicked on overnight. Once, ChatGPT became publicly available, it completely took off, and we saw a rapid generation of other models that came onto the market, and so I think the unpredictability that you mentioned earlier definitely applies here, where it's hard to say exactly where the future is going to go. I think one of the biggest concerns that we hear from discussing with customers how to think about AI, and different organizations voicing a concern around like a lack of humanness, or be automating tasks that they want to ensure there's still that human perspective. And so you talked earlier, for example, about performance management, or I've even seen, I think the SHRM presentation you mentioned earlier, Caroline, talks about like making decisions around layoffs or promotions using AI. And you start to get into places where, on the one hand, AI could provide a counterweight to human bias, but on the other hand, it could strip out some of the necessary like humanizing factors that are needed in really sensitive decisions like that. And so I think that my overall thought on the future of AI is really just that the thoughtfulness around how we apply it is really going to be what guides its efficacy. There is a risk that we use it like a blunt axe, just and it's I think will be most effective for us as a society if we use it more like a surgical tool, and just really thoughtful about it. And it's like you said, it's like the internet. It's fantastic, and it's incredibly exciting, but it's also something where we need to understand what use cases it's best for, um, versus where it's limited.
I think the even the research sites, right? Like it's not populated to one country or one company anymore. There are like interesting ideas coming out of the especially language translation area where models are forced to forget critical pieces of what they learned.
Hmm.
And then you introduce that concept again, which is almost like how kind of like a human brain works, especially imagine you lived in one area and you moved to another country, you stop speaking your native language, and now you're speaking your non-native language. The way your brain adjusts is how they want to emulate this learning algorithm. So it's interesting, right? Like it's super exciting how researchers are tweaking the learning model to behave like how a human would function. But it's hard to teach compassion and empathy, and that on the spot, like some of the decisions that we do with all the other paradoxical learnings we bring as human beings. So it's going to be super like curious, but we got to be like fifth grade students. We have to ask questions, right? Like it's going to be super exciting, but we should not stop asking questions.
100%.
I think it's interesting in terms of how people are going to start learning how to use. I mean, I remember growing up and we had to learn how to use the internet, right? How do you actually research and find paper, researching papers and finding sources that are actually truthful and ethical, and how to pull that research and utilize it in your own. And I think that will be an interesting thing in the future with how do we teach the future population to actually use it. And I think frankly, just using it as a tool, thinking of it as a tool, as a complete replacement of a person or something, I think is a good way to think about it. But we have one more question that came through just now that I think is super interesting. This person's asking, is there a point managing the accuracy and efficiency of AI becomes more inefficient than old-fashioned human output? What are y'all's thoughts on that?
I mean, I would say absolutely. I mean, just like any tool, it's use case dependent in terms of its usefulness. So it's going to be most helpful where you are going to be greatly benefited by scale, right? So when you're doing a large language model with hundreds of billions of different parameters that are being compared, that's not something that I as a human are necessarily going to be able to do as well. And so there are opportunities for something at scale to be done incredibly quickly, where I think there's sensitivity around a topic like diversity. The idea of automating diversity, right? There's is something we should be very careful about, because AI doesn't think in terms of something necessarily being right or wrong. They're thinking in terms of percent match probability to an output based on a comparison of inputs. And so yes, I do think there are certain tasks that are going to be better for humans, and there are certain tasks that are going to be better for AI. And so we just apply it where it's most effective.
I'll add, I love Allison's response, but I'll add one thing. If you talk to lawyers and ask them, what do you think about AI in legal field, right? You'll hear really interesting answers. I'll just give one example. If you're standing in a courtroom, most of the stuff they do, depending on, again, like use case, so depending on the case, they read. There are a lot of like non-verbal reading that happens in building your next argument and whatnot that cannot be on the spot like a model would tackle, right? But if you throw a 600 case material at it, it can summarize it like in a very rapid fashion that might take 60 paralegals to process and build, right? So that's where you need to differentiate the human oversight is kind of like you need to think from a use case perspective and not just throw as a blunt instrument. So the human efficiency, whether it becomes efficient or inefficient, it's in my personal view, at least, it's tied to the use case that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. At least from my perspective, let's say that I'm an HR manager where I could see it being useful is, hey, I need to build an employee engagement plan. What's really cool is you can kind of go in and say, hey, what are some templates or examples as almost like a base point, and then you can build from there. At least that's kind of how I've utilized it as a tool in my experience, even in marketing, right? Sometimes I laugh when I create a query and then I get something back from ChatGPT or something, and it comes back and I'm like, "Huh, that's kind of ridiculous." But it was actually a really good starting point and had me think, and then I could kind of actually go back to the machine and correct it and say, "Hey, no, 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 more this direction, less that." And I think that's where it becomes more efficient. But I think again, using it as a tool and having it as a starting point, I think is where it can be useful in some use cases.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I think that was all of our questions for today. This has been so insightful. Really appreciate your time, Allison and Abika. Really great topic. Again, thank you to everyone that joined us today. We will have the recording shared with you via a YouTube link. But you can, of course, always go to teamsense.com/webinars, where we do have every webinar recording uploaded and ready for you to watch. And you can also register for next week's webinar too. But without
Thanks
further
for
ado,
inviting the nerds. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Caroline.
I love the nerds. I love it. And
Team nerd.
this is Abika's first webinar with us, so I can't wait to do more together. It's going to be fantastic.
Awesome.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you all.
Thank
Have a
you
good
all.
week.
Bye.
Bye.